Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Lords of the Seventh Swarm by Dave Wolverton. This is the third book in the Golden Queen Trilogy. The first book was titled, ironically enough, The Golden Queen. Really enjoyed this, lots of fun. There's very much a science fiction, fantasy, adventure story, very much rooted in 80s style storytelling, even though it came out in the 90s. And then we had the book Beyond the Gate, which, I'm going to be honest, was entirely forgettable and not really entertaining that much. It was very frustrating, a lot of it. So it was a very meh book. I didn't care for it. So I went into I put this off for a while just because I hadn't really loved the second book, and so I wasn't particularly enthused with to read the third one. But I knew I needed to read it eventually because it's on my shelves, it's on my TBRs, need to get to it eventually. And so I started it yesterday and blazed through it all in one day. I loved it. I thought it was really readable, really fascinating. Now, there were several controversial things about it. This is one of those books I've talked about in the past where I say, I love the book, I think it's amazing. I don't think anyone else is going to like it. That's how I feel with this book. I think that this is a fantastic book that most readers aren't going to enjoy, and I'll explain why. This book ties up the trilogy, but not in a way that you would expect. The author makes controversial choices with how he handles the book. For instance, this is a very small-scale book for 2/3 of the book. The characters are all on their own. They're only on one planet. You're really focused in on the character work here. And the big epic trilogy ending stuff doesn't happen until the very end of Act 3. And as a result, the book feels just small overall. Yes, you have that big moment towards the end of Act 3, but overall it just feels small. Secondly, there are some things done with the characters that I think will make a lot of people frustrated. There's two main ways that you can finish with your characters. You can keep them all alive, or you can kill some of them, or all of them even. And this book takes kind of a third path. And I don't want to spoil it, so I won't spoil it, but I'll say this book takes a third path that I think that people will be frustrated and pleased at the same time with it, which is why I think it's going to be kind of controversial. But there's not many people who have read this series. It's not like it's well reviewed or well out there. I don't think there's any, other than my YouTube channel, I don't think there's any book reviews of this trilogy out on the internet. But I certainly feel good finishing the trilogy. I thought book 1 was great, book 2 was not great, and book 3 was really great. I really liked the falling action in the book. I really thought that I thought after the climax was my biggest problem with the book, but after the climax, all the falling action I thought was terrific. But here's some more things about the book that I find interesting. So this book has the trio, Galen and Maggie, and also has Auric the bear, and then they have a fourth person who's tagging along, Talia, who was a human-turned bear. And the four of them go on the planet of Ruin, and they spend almost all the book there, and they meet up with this character, Lord Felf, who has these family members who are named after Greek mythologies. And it's really interesting because the whole Felf and his whole family are horrible, awful people. And it's kind of Succession-y, it's kind of Game of Thrones-y, the way that they're all bickering and playing games with each other just to get on top and just to get one up each other. And they're just a creepy family, a creepy, powerful family. And then, Galen and Maggie are dealing with the difficulties of Maggie's pregnant, and they're both the lords of the 6th swarm and the 7th swarm, and really all the other swarms are coming after them. And Auric is going through an existential crisis because he believes that God wants him to be a priest, but he also wants to be in love with Talia, the human-turned bear. And so Auric doesn't know what to do with his life exactly, and he must figure out how he can serve both God and Talia. And it's a really fascinating discussion. There's a lot of discussion about the Bible, a lot of discussion about Bible verses and the context of verses. And other book reviewers have called this a Bible study because of how much is in there in some sequences. It's not too many sequences, but when it's here, it's a major part of the book. And I, for one, loved it because I thought it was a fascinating discussion, but I can understand how people wouldn't like it. Part of that was I really liked it. Just Auric is just such a fascinating character. The way he talks, I think he's the one character I loved the most about this trilogy, and of course he shines really well here. I think this is Auric's best book. He was kind of sidelined in books 1 and 2 a little bit, but he really has a major point here. And so I liked Auric's plot line here. And then there is a plot line between Maggie and Lord Felph's family members, Zeus and all the others. And I'm going to make a comparison here that is just a weird comparison, but stick with me. There was a couple of sequences, one in particular, that felt straight out of Steve Perry's Shadows of the Empire. It was weird how much those sequences lined up. Particularly how Gizor from Shadows of the Empire is like Zeus in this book, and then Leia from Shadows of the Empire is like Maggie, and then Chewbacca would be Chewbacca and also the kind of assistant to Gizor. Those two characters are meshed into Herm and Hera in this book. So there's a lot of comparisons, and I just found it interesting that the books lined up that much. You don't see science fiction books line up that closely too often. So I thought that was interesting. But I really liked that storyline too. And then you have the climax, which finally brings characters to a head with the Lords of the Seventh Swarm, which I think would have been more satisfying if Everin, who was in the first book, if Everin had shown up and been more involved. But she's not in the book at all. And she's not in book 2 at all. She's referenced, but she's only in book 1. And I think that was a major flaw that would have helped the series if Everin was a through-line character. And instead, it's just all about Galen and Maggie trying to fight off the swarm. And so there's some interesting world building with some of the animals, some of the creatures, the alien creatures. The Qualiwoos were really interesting. And there's one sequence where I'm trying to figure out, why are you just putting us in the mind of the alien creatures? And then all of a sudden it makes sense, and you're like, ooh, that's really cool. And then, of course, the Dronin are there, and there is a character from the previous books. I won't say who, but he shows up right at the beginning of chapter 1, and I was like, okay, he's back. I'm so excited for that. So that was really cool. So those are my thoughts on Lords of the Seventh Swarm. I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I think as an enjoyable book, it is the most enjoyable book of the trilogy, I think. However, I do think that it doesn't stick the landing in a traditional sense. It feels too much like the first 2 acts are just, a middle book almost, and then Act 3, he just crams a lot in there, but it's not satisfying. So I would say that it's a 9 out of 10 because it messed that up a little bit. But from an enjoyable standpoint, I loved it. I loved the book. I had so much fun with it. So if you've read Lords of the Seventh Swarm, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.